done that. Now, I'm thrilled for us to have Charlene Li with us. I've learned from her over the years. I've been a big Charlene Li fan. Read many of her books. As I mentioned, she's written half a dozen. Her most recent one is Disruption Mindset. So Charlene is at the cutting edge and has been of leadership and disruption and what we need to think about in the future and adjust both as leaders and individuals and help lead our teams effectively to be able to handle that disruption. So this is not what has happened just over the past couple of years. This is the acceleration that has been happening over the past dozen plus years that Charlene has been studying. She's also been a very successful entrepreneur, including starting her own consulting firm that she had sold back in 2015 to profit, now associated with another consulting firm looking to take on global challenges from the environment to income inequality. So Charlene does great big things, and she's going to take some time to share some of her thoughts and perspectives with us all throughout. And afterwards, feel free to submit questions for Charlene in the Q&A feature. I will monitor Q&A and want to get to as many of your questions as possible. Charlene Li, we are thrilled to have you in Greater Washington with leaders of Greater Washington. Welcome to LGW.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. And please put as many questions as you can into the chat. Would love to take on as many of those as possible. So I'm sharing some slides here. I wanted to talk today, first of all, about what does it mean to be a leader? And I am very cognizant that I'm speaking to many leaders here today. And the way to begin this is to think about the best leader you've ever had the privilege of working with. So think about who that leader is. Think about not what they did or what they said, but think about how they made you feel. And if you could just put into the chat, I'm going to try to open it up and see how, what are some of the words that come to mind? Like think of a single word about what that feeling looks like and feels like. And for example, I've heard people say words like, I felt listened to. We have Priscilla saying, I felt empowered. Stephanie says partnered. Celeste, encouraged. Monica, inspired. Thank you so much for these beautiful, beautiful words. These are incredible feelings that we have. I think about the leader I worked with and had the privilege of working with, and he made me feel limitless, that I could do anything. Kelly, it sounds like you have a similar experience, that you felt supported, that this person was behind you and that you were going to be successful because of that. So thank you for sharing those beautiful words. The reason I want to point this out is that when it comes to leadership, the way I think about it is that it's really this feeling, and it really stems from the fact that we have, trying to get back to my place here. Here we go. Leadership is really a relationship. It's just a relationship between two people, one person who aspires to create change and between another person who is inspired to follow them to make that change come real. And I like to say that leaders create change. And if you're not a leader, if you're not creating change, that's fine. You're not so much a leader as you are a manager of the status quo. And we need managers. We need people to run things, to have great operational excellence. But we also need leaders to step into the void to help make that change become real. And when I think about what change looks like, and we've just been through a huge change over the past 2 years, I think of disruption as an opportunity for change. Because when things are being thrown up into the air, we don't know where things are going to come when they land down. The disruptive leaders are the ones who jump up into the air, grab these pieces together and put them back together in new and different ways. We see the opportunity to be able to go and create and see opportunities where there's apparently none, that nobody else can see them. And we saw this with COVID, and we see this continually now with so many changes and so much disruption and chaos happening. We can sit here and wait for it to calm down and hopefully become clearer about the path we take, or we can take advantage of this and say, well, how does this open up my mind to new possibilities? How do we have the resilience in our organization to be able to move forward with confidence into this change. So I'm going to today be talking about a few paradoxes of leadership and the challenges that we have about thinking about these things. Because as you can imagine, I've been giving hundreds of these talks, and the questions that people come back to me are some of this. So the first question I hear oftentimes is, how do we embrace order and change in the same space? Because we are constantly pulled into this need, because we as humans want some constantness. We crave things being familiar. It's comfortable. And at the same time, we want newness. We want variability. We want change. We want something to help us grow, to expand our horizons. And this is a tug and pull. We see this in our personal lives. We see this in our organizations. So how do we live with order and change in the same space? And what you realize very quickly as experienced leaders, as wise leaders, that these two things absolutely need to coexist together. Because you can never stay completely static. You can never stay exactly the same. Because in order to maintain even the status quo, to continue to have operational excellence, for example, you need to be constantly changing. There may be incremental changes, but you're constantly changing. In the same respect, if you're trying to create exponential change and growth, you also need to put order on that. Otherwise, you never scale. So order and change need to really work together. So how do we embrace the two together is a key thing. The second question I often hear from people is, how do we lead when we are uncertain? And I have this great little chart that talks about the messy middle. You go from a starting point here, end up here. Along the way, you're going to have to encounter a lot of growth and exploration, a lot of challenges, but you will be growing into this space, into this new after. And for a lot of us, we just want to get through this messy middle as quickly as possible. We want to get from before to after with as little disruption as possible. I would encourage you instead to embrace the messy middle, because during this time, we sometimes call it in psychological parlance, the liminal space. You walk in and you don't know how things are going to end up. You have a destination, but it's not clear how you're going to get there. This is a very formative, potentially very creative time, because you're no longer tied down by the status quo. You're no longer constrained by anything there, and yet you haven't settled in the new place. So you might explore and find new ways to get to your destination. You may even figure out that destination isn't the right one. We want to change it. But I would encourage you as leaders and also as leaders of the organization to create that container, that space, so people feel safe inside of there. Doesn't mean that they're comfortable, but they're safe. And what we find about the liminal path, liminal space, this messy middle, is it's really helpful to have some sort of structure, some sort of path. And it's also essential to have some sort of guide, somebody who can tell them when they get nervous and they start freezing up. They can see and feel that someone is there who they can look to and say, they're going to say in your back, you're going to be okay. Keep going. Keep exploring. Don't get out of this messy middle too soon. In order for us to create that space, to create that container for people, this one fundamental idea really holds them back, which is the need to be in control. And I like to talk about giving up the need to be in control to realize that you've always been in command. And that the role of a leader needs to move from having all of the answers to being able to ask great questions. Because as that person's going through the messy middle and they're figuring things out along the way, they're gaining confidence in their new competencies in this new space that they can operate there. And that doesn't come from somebody removing that burden from them. It comes from them struggling with this, learning how to become that new part of a new organization, new person. And the way to do that is to guide them along the way as that leader to help them feel empowered, supported, inspired. All those beautiful words again that we heard. So when I think about this, it's a single concept of agency that we want to create in our organizations. How do we lead in uncertain times? It's basically to let go of control, to ask lots of questions, and to create agency in every single person so that they feel like they are an owner in the outcomes. And when you have that, it's incredible what happens, because it's no longer about you having to come up with the answers. It's about the entire organization coming up with an answer. I mean, you have more people, more brains, more eyes trying to understand and assess what the situation is, you're always going to come up with a better answer. The problem with agency is if you just throw open the doors, people are going to say, well, I've never done this before. You say I'm empowered, but what can I really do? And I love the idea of agency instead of empowered, because empowered says, I'm waiting for somebody over there to give me the power to act. Whereas agency says, you've always had that power. You've always known how you can do things. And the way to support agency is to create the edges, to really clearly define it. I put up this picture of a tennis court, because imagine tennis courts without rules, without lines. The game of tennis would not be interesting and you wouldn't know how to play it. In the same way, if you're trying to create disruptive change, exponential change, the more you have to actually draw lines, define the edges. How far can we go? How much change can we create? Because if you don't, everyone's going to stay really close to the home base. But instead, take people out to the edges, show them this is how far we can go right now. And if you feel comfortable, we can push the edges and maybe we can go even further than we ever thought was possible. You want to encourage people to go all the way to the edge, because that's where the growth is the fastest and the greatest. The third question I would ask you to ponder is, how open are we really? Because another key belief and trait of disruptive organizations on top of agency, it is openness. It is the fact that we share openly, nothing is hidden. We have great transparency and authenticity in the way that we communicate so that we have great relationships. You can't have anything stand in the way of this relationship with the people you're leading. Can't leave anything unsaid, otherwise there's no integrity in that relationship. And you can't move forward into these huge, audacious changes unless you all know you're good with each other. Everything just gets clogged up, bogged down, and nothing happens. So I want to talk a little bit about why hierarchies exist, because in the past, information was very hard to come by. It was difficult to communicate. So we created these hierarchies so that people could be heard, the communication could go out to the very edges, and information can flow up and be filtered to the very top. We know what happens when you play this kind of form of telephone. You've ever played that childhood game where you whisper in somebody's ear and you say it quickly, and what happens at the other end? It's completely muddled. And that's one of the problems of hierarchies. It's also very slow. And it doesn't match how work really gets done. It is much more organic, it is networked, it is collaborative across and around these hierarchies. And yet we have communications and decisions and approvals that are still very much based on these old hierarchies and ways that we do things, and they don't reflect the way we actually work. And one of the biggest issues is how we share information, how open we are with each other. And it's inside of knowledge management tools and collaboration tools, but it's also just how we interact. Do we really tell each other the truth? And there was a fundamental belief like, well, if I tell the truth, I'm going to get in trouble, I'm going to lose my job. Or I don't have permission to even raise this question. I see a red flag, I see this alarm going off here, and I don't have permission to raise it up. But if you have agency, if you have that relationship, if there's trust, if there's openness, things get completely changed. So ask yourself, how open are you really? How open is your organization? Is there such strong and rampant trust that you can move at the speed of trust to be able to meet the challenges of the highly disruptive environments that we're in? The last question I want to put out there is, what's your relationship with failure? I asked this question of a leader, an extraordinary leader, and he said to me, we never fail. And I went, well, this is going to be an interesting conversation because we all fail. We all fail in small ways and big ways. And he says, no, we just had such a big issue with failure. There was such a stigma associated with that. We got rid of the word. Instead, we think about any time we don't meet our goal, we think of it as a learning opportunity. We think about it as a step towards our success. And we realize that if we remove this concept that we even ever fail, which is constantly learning and growing, it changes the demeanor of the conversations. The reality is we have a really hard time dealing with failure. We as leaders, we as organizations, as people don't like to fail. And I would encourage you to think about what does it really truly mean to fail? And one very specific symptom of this is that we act as if every single decision that we make is going to be irreversible. And so we put huge amounts of efforts into the smallest, simplest decisions, go through multiple gates and checks, have to reassess everything for everybody, make sure there's consensus, versus realizing that 99% of the decisions that we make are actually reversible. We just don't want to do that because it feels wrong. It feels like we failed. If we decide to go in this one direction and it turned out not to be the right one, the stigma of having to go back and reverse yourself and go in another direction is so huge. We never want to have to do that. If we have a great relationship with failure, so many things change. You will actually start making decisions faster with what I call minimally viable data. You'll decide what is the one piece of data I need to just move forward one tiny little step. And as soon as I get that, I'll make that decision, even if I'm just 60% more sure than the other one, just a little bit more sure. And we'll see where we are, because we'll be standing in a new and different place. We'll see so much more, and we'll know so much more and gain confidence about whether this is the right decision to make or not. Or do we need to go back and make a different decision? But when we remove that stigma of failure, when we have a really good relationship with failure, we can then do these kinds of discoveries, move at, as I think the third belief of disruptive organizations, move and have a bias for action. So agency, openness, and a bias for action are the key foundational beliefs of disruptive organizations. I want to close out by just sharing a couple last thoughts. This is never easy. And one of the reasons I find that leaders step away, pull back from disruptive change is because it feels uncomfortable. And I can guarantee you, having worked with so many organizations, having gone through disruptive change myself, you have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to prepare yourself for that hard journey ahead. And in particular, we need to prepare our organizations to lead in a very different way, to lead them into disruption and prepare them, the people who we are leading, for this really hard journey. And I think the key to all of this is to have confidence, to know that as you go into this journey, not that you're going to be right, not that you're ever going to even reach the journey, but that you're going to be okay no matter what that outcome is. That is truly confidence, because you're no longer afraid of any consequences. And if you take that journey out to the very edge to explore what's possible at that edge, you know you're doing this with your team, so that if you stumble, if you should fall, your team will be there to support each other, that you're going to be okay, that you're going to do this together, and you're so strong and united as a team that we're going to have the confidence to deal with this no matter what the outcome. So I just want to go back to my theme and then open up for questions. Disruption is an opportunity for change. And I encourage you to think about disruption in a different way, to think about change in a different way, because I do believe it's going to change the way that you will show up as a leader. So this is my contact information. I encourage you to stay in touch. I'm pretty much Charlene Li in every single social channel you can think of. And I also have the slides and many other resources available for you at charleneli.com/leadership-today. So you can go there and get these slides. And again, lots of workbooks and other courses and materials to help you on your leadership journey.
That's outstanding. Charlene, thank you for that. And I do encourage everyone to submit your questions in Q&A. I want to start out with a couple myself, drilling down on the importance of agency that you also repeatedly mentioned. In that, in one way, form, shape, or another, for years, leaders have talked about it or have wanted a greater sense of urgency and initiative on parts of their people. So in your experience, what do you see as best practices of organizations that provide that environment of agency for their people and nurture the capabilities for them to take on that agency? Because again, I see a disconnect in the talk, but then many leaders will come up with reasons why in their organization there is SEC regulations and therefore they don't want to give agency. There are it's in the healthcare field, therefore they don't want to give agency. So everyone agrees with the concept and then comes up for reasons why in their organization they cannot give people agency. So what are some best practices and thoughts with respect to that?
It's to be really clear. It's to be really clear what you can do and what you can't do. It's so easy to say to everybody, just don't do anything, right? Don't be on social media, nothing. And now we want people to be ambassadors and advocates for us. Go and use social media. And they're like, yeah, right. For years, you've been telling me, don't do anything. It's not safe out there. And now you're telling me do tons of stuff. I'm not going out there. That feels really dangerous. So I think about defining that box, that sandbox, defining the edges of what is possible. In the beginning, you're going to have to define it very, very small, very clearly, and encourage people to do that. The other example is people will say, you're empowered to go make decisions, but you got to clear everything with me. You know, that's a contradiction. You say I'm empowered, but then you come and micromanage everything that I do. Do you really, truly trust me? And so it's an examination of what's really going on here. SEC regulations, HIPAA requirements. These are all really clear guidelines. Tell people, don't do these things. Be really clear what that looks like. Provide the training. Provide the review initially so that you feel comfortable letting go of them and they gain the confidence that they can do this. And then very importantly, prepare for things that go wrong. Inevitably, things go wrong, not because people are incompetent, because things just go wrong. How do you build that resilience and again, that confidence into the organization so that you have that muscle memory? So agencies it's a hard thing to develop, but I think it's us as leaders. It's not about our employees. It's about us as leaders feeling comfortable and having the confidence that our employees can do this work.
It requires a lot of confidence, and where I'm running into it a lot, Charlene, is, and would love to combine that with getting your thoughts with respect to future of work, in that as organizations, many of them that could, with professionals, transition to remote work, they did, and for many there was a certain trust level and agency for people to get their jobs done. At the same time, sale of tracking software installed on computers and everything else went up too. So some organizations weren't as comfortable. So looking back and now looking forward to the future of work, how can organizations think about the future of work, combining it with this agency that you just mentioned?
Yes, I talk about the future of work is going to be defined by the relationships you want to have. And it's about the kind of relationship we want to have with our employees and also the relationship that employees want with us. And we saw the great resignation. A lot of people weren't getting what they wanted. They wanted more agency. They wanted more conversation. They wanted more flexibility. They wanted more security. And employers are like, no, too bad. You do it this way or that way, like, or you get out. Like, okay, I'm getting out. Wait, we didn't mean that. So what kind of relationship do we want with people? Do we want people who are sheep, who just follow us along and do exactly the job? And that could work. That could work in some organizations where people are just like, to employees, put your head down, do the job, don't look up and look around, just do your job. Just do exactly as I told you to. And you see that in Amazon warehouses, and they have 140, 150% turnover every year. So they can do that though, because they pay people enough and it's not a highly technical job, but it's like, put your head down, don't ask questions, just do this job. Other people just want yes people. I just want people who agree with me all the time. I don't want to be challenged. And you have other dysfunctions that come with that, but some advantages too. The ideal of effective followers, and this is a whole research area of followership as opposed to leadership. Followership is really about that relationship. Effective followers, they have tremendous agency. They see themselves as partners with you. They're going to challenge you. It's going to be uncomfortable being a leader. Frankly, it's really hard managing effective followers because they always feel, well, I want to say something about this. They have tremendous agency. They're active. They're participating in things. So that can be very challenging for leaders who've never experienced it before. So what is the future of work going to look like? It's not about the technologies. It's really about what kind of relationship do we want with people. And when you have that, then all the questions around hybrid, remote, how do we run things, they start just becoming so clear when you're clear about the relationship you want with people.
Which is interesting, Charlene, and just wanted to mention one thing before getting to two questions. In my view, and some of the organizations I work with, that hybrid requires, or virtual required it, but people were able to get away without it, a much more capable relationship between the what classically is seen as middle management of organizations and the people that have the relationship with the individuals that are doing the work. So the coaching, the conversations, the relationship building in the small teams is really important. So it's not the culture of the organization of few hundred or 1,000. It is the culture of the team of 10, and how whoever is that team leader is interacting with them. That capability needs to be turbocharged.
Yeah. There's a great saying that people don't leave jobs and companies, they leave leaders. They leave because their leader is just not there for them. And we saw that employee engagement went up and skyrocketed after George Floyd was murdered, because people were taking time off and asking, how are you? How are you doing? No, truly, how are you doing? And people are like, wow, somebody cares. Somebody actually it cares about me as a person. They're seeing me, my whole self. And so I think about what people really want. We want to be seen. We want to be acknowledged. We want to be able to bring everything to the table and not have to check it at the door in order to belong. I feel safe, especially as a woman, as a person of color, to be able to bring all of those aspects of me into work. And we know that men are rewarded for being vulnerable and emotional. Women are penalized for being vulnerable and emotional. So how do we bring these strengths in? When it comes to hybrid work and remote work, I see a question here from Monica about how do you have this? Is it challenging to create things in a remote work environment? If anything, it requires you to step up your leadership game even more, because you don't have that day-to-day side-by-side interaction and proximity to be able to just kind of see and read body language. So you have to be more attuned when you have hybrid, or I call it distributed work situations, because you can't just take it for granted that it's working. You actually have to check in. And so we as leaders didn't know how to do that. And to your point, Mahan, we're terrible about providing support to those frontline leaders. The very first leaders get promoted not because they're great leaders, but because they did a good job, which you're not going to do anymore. And it's assumed that they can tell people how to do that job. But again, if a leader's job is not to necessarily provide the answers, but to ask great questions, we may be promoting the wrong people. So how we promote people, how we train people at the very front lines, from the very beginning, from day one, how to be a fantastic leader, that is what's missing. And also just that nurturing of relationships, that is their primary job. That is all missing.
Which, like Karen says, people want to be seen, valued, and heard. Absolutely right, Karen. Todd also mentions he's interested in your manager versus leader dynamic. And if you could please explain more, since both are necessary skills and abilities.
Yes, I think we all swing back and forth between managers and leaders. It's really hard to be creating change all the time. And as I was saying before, when you're creating change, at some point you need to become a manager and operationalize it and put the structures in place. The best disruptive leaders are the ones who can inspire a vision and a change, put the resources in place to make that change happen. And then also just make sure that everybody is here and that we can operationalize it, put in place the processes, the governance, all those like nitty-gritty details. Again, it may not be them, but they make sure that that is happening. I visit and meet with all these hugely disruptive organizations that are constantly driving growth. I think of them as the Energizer Bunny of disruption. They just seem to never slow down. And I was so curious, how do they do it? And one of the things they do is they have a lot of process. They have a lot of structure. They have a lot of procedures and rituals. And if it's not there, they make sure it's adapted, and they are constantly refreshing them to meet the new challenges. So they are completely locked down. They're highly structured. You go into any of these, the decision-making process for new things is very clearly laid out. How do we make decisions around things? So you're not spending an ounce of your energy on figuring out how to do things. You're just constantly making decisions to be able to move forward. All of the processes are geared towards promoting and encouraging and supporting change rather than supporting the status quo and locking that into place. So it's one of the most interesting counterintuitive things that I found. They have more structure, more governance. One of my favorite things, governance, more governance in order to move fast. It's fascinating how that works.
It really is interesting, and how often then in organizations like that, you also find people talking about, well, this is the way we do things here. That's not, or and get stuck in those paradigms. Now, Teresa asks about culture, and Teresa, share a couple of words about it too. She says, does culture differ from defining the relationship, and if so, how?
Yes. So cultures absolutely is important to think about, because I think of culture as consistent of two things: beliefs and your behaviors. If you believe certain things, you'll behave in a certain way. If you start acting a certain way, that ingrains it into beliefs, because your beliefs come from the experiences that you have. So what experiences work? What kind of experiences do I want to have? What have I seen in the past? And that comes into beliefs and behaviors, and then they end up in results. So when we think about culture, how important that is, it's hugely important, because it determines how we're going to work together. And so when it comes to these areas, I think it's really important to think about culture. And so and when it comes to defining those relationships, yes, you have the underlying beliefs that you have in a culture, but you can also say that the way that we believe this, it's not working for the kind of relationship I want to have. So what beliefs are holding us back? And what beliefs do we need to replace those with a new one? So here's a quick exercise you can do. It's incredibly powerful. Sit down with your team, in person or virtual, and say, what are the beliefs that are holding us back? What are those limiting beliefs? And then write them down, share them. And that way, classic brainstorming, no one is owning a particular area. And you look at those beliefs and you go, what are the common ones? You define what those common beliefs are, articulate them. It's like beliefs are like, I don't have permission to suggest change. Another belief is we don't have budget or people and time and resources to make this happen. And the first one may be, okay, that's a limited belief. We're not going to believe that anymore. We're not going to act as if we don't have permission. We actually have permission. We have agency. And here are the experiences we're going to create to change those beliefs. We're going to have those beliefs change and reflected in the behaviors. We should be seeing people act in a different way. And if you don't, then go back and say, what's missing here? Close that loop and say, what new experiences do we need to create? Are there rituals and processes we have to put in place to codify this into our culture? You can change culture. I looked at Uber. They changed their culture in 6 months because the CEO says, we're not going to believe these things anymore. Bro culture is not appropriate. It's holding us back. Instead, we're going to have an inclusive culture. So what does that look like? And they systematically changed. They found every single pocket where this old bro culture could live and ripped it out of the organization. When they found a behavior that was not in line with these new beliefs, they said, well, you can't behave in that way. And if you persist, you're not going to be part of this organization anymore. They created new experiences so people could actually see how that looks and feels, that changes their beliefs, and then started to influence their behaviors. And they changed their culture radically in 6 months. So I don't believe it when people say, we can't change our culture. Absolutely. If you want to change your culture, you can, but you need to replace those old beliefs with new beliefs. So you do have permission. What does that look like? And be really detailed about this and systematic and strategic. about creating your culture?
Charlene, what a powerful question. And I would really encourage everyone to go back to their teams and ask this question. And being that everyone or most of the people are very familiar with Leadership Greater Washington, I'll use LGW as an example for this. For us to ask, what are the beliefs that are holding LGW back, right? So when you actually force yourself to go through the painful exercise initially of saying that, I even have a hard time, for example, saying it, Charlene, because I love this organization, like I know everyone who's involved with it does, and therefore sometimes that causes us not to ask the questions in order to do the things that it takes to go to a next level and become an organization that embraces disruption. So what are the beliefs that are holding us back? And that becomes a great conversation you can all have with your teams. One thought on culture I also wanted to share. I love how Seth Godin also puts it. People like us do things like this. So again, talking about LGW, Charlene, at some point when you're in DC, you come to an LGW event, you will see leaders, a very diverse group of leaders, all running up to each other, giving each other big hugs, right? Because in LGW, that's part of our culture as a group of leaders. People like us do things like this. We see each other, we greet each other with a hug, while in another organization that wouldn't be the case. So in every one of our organizations, there are things that people like us do things like this. Some of them are healthy. Some of them, as you mentioned in the Uber example, are very unhealthy and need to be ripped out.
Absolutely. So doing a culture audit, knowing what people believe. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to ask people who are brand new to the organization, what do you find what are you observing? What's great? What things feel really weird? And because we don't even see it anymore, because we just do things like this because we like each other. And so asking your new people within the first 2 weeks, because it goes so quickly, that perspective changes so quickly. It's gone within weeks. Really interview your new people to say, like, what do you think about our culture? What's working, what's not? And again, just incredible insight to have that.
So Charlene, as the leaders, again, listening to this, are thinking about both the way they lead their teams and the structure within the organization, what are the best approaches in your view on how the organization can go about setting the parameters that you mentioned earlier with respect to, for example, in tennis, you have the parameters that you need to play within. What are the best ways to determine what is really a line on the tennis court and what shouldn't be? Because the other thing that I find is organizations put a lot more lines on the tennis court than there should be, while those lines can be removed. How do you recommend for people to think about that?
Just look at, I mean, I spoke to this one organization, Telstra, and they said one of the most pivotal moments in changing the culture is the CEO put onto their intranet, what are the processes that are just useless, that we have no idea what we're doing? Put them in here because we want to know. We want to get better and efficient, and we'll let you know why we keep it in there, and we're like, we don't know why that's there. It should be gone. So it's actually even just asking the question: do we have process bloat? Do we have, are these the best ways, that this is the minimum amount of process that we need? Can we make better decisions by removing or completely redoing these things? And we just assume that this is the way things work. Well, instead of doing more things, maybe we should be doing better things. How could we be doing things that are different that actually could help us along the way? And I find decision-making in gates, like, why do we have this gate? Is it to appease one person 2 generations ago in that management position who wanted to have a say? Do we really need that? And I remember sitting with the CFO of a very large manufacturer. He said, all these pricing changes that you all keep asking me to approve, I don't need to approve them anymore. And this gasp went up, like, well, you always approve these things. And he goes, yeah, but I always say yes. Who am I to second guess you? And they were, the managers, the leaders were very uncomfortable with this. They go, well, we need your approval because I need approval before I can make this decision. And he goes, no, you don't. You already know, you made the decision. Just go with it. The managers needed the approval. They didn't really, they felt that they were getting like a considered response from the CFO, and the CFO was like, I just approve everything. They had no idea that they had this process in place that absolutely served no purpose at all. No one ever asked about it. No one ever challenged it. And when those leaders all realized that they had the power right from the very beginning, they were like, oh, completely changed the way that they look at the world. So it was a fascinating exchange that I witnessed in that moment.
That's incredible. And just want to jump in very quickly. Teresa also says the Uber example that you used was a great one. She was in a meeting last night with their former chief marketing officer, Bozoma St. John, who spoke about the actions that they took that you mentioned. Now, Charlene, I was cracking up this morning hearing one of your latest podcast conversations. You were, because I know you spent time in the future of work and future of technology's impact. So would love to get your thoughts with respect to the next 5 to 10 years. No one knows exactly what's going to happen, but you spend a lot of time studying it. I'll mention, I was cracking up because you were talking about being okay with chips being put on you to monitor different things and how people cringe when they hear that. And I cracked up when you talked about how we already might have those anyway. So I'll ask you to mention that and your thoughts with respect to where technology is taking our organizations, our society over the next 5-10 years.
Sure. Yeah, I want to chip myself because I don't know if you know much about women's clothing. We rarely have pockets in our clothing. And so I am constantly losing this thing left and right multiple times a day. I put it down, I remember where it was. And so I don't just chip myself, just chip me already. Just put a chip so I can just have it there. Maybe I have glasses with a heads up display. I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to work. But I never lose this, right? And the reality is when people say, well, that's so hard. I mean, I feel like I lose control if I put a chip in my hand. And I go, guess where this goes in most people? It goes in your back pocket. And that's where it lives. We've basically already chipped our butts and we don't even know it. We've given up control to all the information that we're sharing with people. We have no idea. And you're comfortable with that versus putting a chip in your hand or somewhere in your body where you know exactly what's going in, what's it going to be used for. So let's wake up to the fact that we've already chipped ourselves. We just don't even realize it. We've chipped ourselves physically with these phones. We've chipped ourselves digitally with all these cookies. Our behaviors are known. Facebook knows us better than we know ourselves. We never knew we needed those shoes that showed up in that ad, but they're perfect. I'm like, those shoes look great. I clicked on the ad. It's unbelievable. So our sense of control is misplaced. We actually don't have control. What we can have control over is being much more aware of what is out there, how we're engaging with the world, how our relationships are with each other. So I have a very distinct and different point of view. I'm glad you saw that video. It's one of my favorite things. But yeah, it's just a very counterintuitive way of thinking about privacy and data.
It is, and it's impacting a lot of our lives. But again, until I heard you say it, I hadn't reflected on it exactly the same way, that I have a chip on my butt all the time walking around in my back pocket or my chest pocket. So I have that. In sort of wrapping up, Charlene, if anyone has any final questions, you can submit it. But in wrapping up, I want to mention a couple of things about Charlene and then give you a chance for any final thoughts. Charlene does a great podcast of her own. There's a lot of interviews, great ones, including this latest one that I heard. She was kind enough. We did one for my podcast, Partnering Leadership. Her books are outstanding, and Disruption Mindset is, I find that leaders who are more willing to disrupt themselves, Charlene, are also more open to let their teams and organizations become disruptive ones. So change starts with us. Change is not about our teams needing to change and our organizations needing to change. We need to start with ourselves. And Charlene, as she mentioned, has a lot of great content also on her website, both the slides and other things that she has already put on there. Charlene, would love to get any of your final thoughts before we wrap up the session.
I think, Mahan, you put a great point that the change has to start with us, and to think about how your leadership needs to be different, how you need to show up differently, because you're driving huge amounts of change. The everyday leadership that we have is not sufficient. It's not going to serve us well in the way that we lead every day. So really think strategically how you want to craft a different type of relationship in order to maneuver and navigate all these changes.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for joining Leadership Greater Washington, and we look forward to actually physically seeing you at some point in this region. Really appreciate you, Charlene, and appreciate everyone joining in. And thank you, Karen. Great seeing you and seeing everyone else with your questions, and look forward to seeing you in person. Thank you, Charlene Li.
Thank you.